Mr. Rock, welcome to A Bit of Orange. What can we do for you?
Hello, Mr. Orange. I wouldn't say I'm a long time watcher. I've been watching for a minute. I weirdly enough came from Professor Stick's channel, but no, I enjoy what you do. I enjoy the different points of view, and I can't believe people would come here just to tell you you're wrong like that. But I wanted your opinion on, obviously, exactly how you define evolution, why, and stuff like that. So,
Okay. I can do that for you. If I can figure out how to use Zoom, I even have a slideshow prepared. Hopefully now you are seeing the Tree of Life. Yes?
Yep.
No? Yeah?
I am.
All right, cool.
It's up there.
So welcome to the Darwinian Tree of Life. In order to define what evolution is, I find you have to start here because this is the story that Darwinian evolution is intending to tell. So big picture, when people talk about evolution, they're talking about two distinct things that overlap a lot. One is the story of evolution as the history of life on Earth. The other is the mechanisms of what causes the change that the story tells. Now, does that make sense, first of all?
Yes, that makes sense.
Awesome. So the tree here is meant to be the story of life on Earth. So we start off with, first there was nothing, then it explodes, it makes hydrogen. Hydrogen somehow turns into rocks, and then some of those rocks fall together and create the Earth. The Earth cools, and then water shows up, and then the water rains on the rocks for millions of years, turns into soup. The soup figures out how to write DNA and build a cell, and then that cell figures out how to metabolize and reproduce itself. Yay, life! Now Darwinian evolution can begin. So you have bacteria. And if you've ever seen the timeline, it's just bacteria for 3 billion years. It's just, the stuff that you scrub off your teeth when you brush your teeth every night, that's all the Earth had for 75% of our history. Not a whole lot going on there. It's like an unclean bachelor's fridge. It's just nasty. But after a while, they got sick of that, and they were like, you know what we should do? We should make multicellular life. We should get together in groups that are just a unit. So they did that after some committee meetings, but it happened pretty quick. I mean, it happened so fast, they literally call it an explosion. And then they made worms, and then they turned into fish, that turned into lizards, that turned into squirrels, that turned into primates, one of which turned into William Shatner. And so life is beautiful after all. So there is the sort of story, and of course it branches. So the bacteria went to both animals and plants, and the plants diverged into other plants, and some of the mammals became rodents or primates, some of them became wolves. So the story is meant to explain, why is there William Shatner wolves and cabbages at all? Where did they all come from? So it is also meant to be a sort of natural explanation of how these things happened without divine intervention, without intelligent design, with just nature left to nature. Now, so far, is any of that seem like too far out that you need to push back or ask questions about it?
So far it all seems to be good. The only thing that sticks out is just the specifics, but those are just specific names I would just call them. Everything else makes sense so far.
Okay. And for anybody watching who is already in the comment section in all caps, the species that I have chosen to represent the different animal kinds on my picture are not meant to represent what I think evolutionists provide as like the first fish, the first lizard. These are just meant to be something that everyone could look at and go, I know that's a worm. So that's it. So that's one of the complaints I've had. Are like, nobody says that fish evolved from earthworms. I'm like, yeah, I just Googled worm and picked a picture. Like that's not meant to be literally the first worm, but worm is supposed to be one of the first things that was a multicellular life form. And so that goes in the slot. So just to clarify that for everybody. I also don't think William Shatner is the only human to evolve. So again, in case you wanted to nitpick about some of the details, I'm aware of them. All right, so again, every step here represents we're going through time. So from the distant past at the bottom, traveling up, and then eventually branching off. So we start off with a planet where there's only bacteria. And then eventually worms evolve. And so now we have a planet where there's only bacteria and worms. There are no fish, lizards, squirrels, or monkeys. And then over time, fish evolve. And now we have bacteria, worms, fish. And so that's how it progresses. And that's one of those things that sometimes it's hard to grasp the big picture. But when you're looking back in time, you are looking at a time on this history wherein there was just worms, that there was nothing with legs, there was nothing really swimming, there was nothing with eyes. That's how the story has to progress, is from the nothing to the everything that is now. sometimes, it's hard to grasp that minutia. So there you go. I'm a middle school teacher. I have to throw in the details. So this is the story that Darwinian evolution is intending to tell. And the reason why the story is important is because when we look for what are the mechanisms of evolution, we have to find mechanisms that can make this story happen. So if you propose a mechanism of evolution, like say, people will say, well, evolution is just change over time. Anything that biologically, anything that changes is evolving. And I go, okay, so when I get a haircut, I've evolved. And you would have to say, well, no, that's not what evolution is. It's because that's not the kind of change that will turn worms into fish. No matter how many times I get a haircut, or how many times you, I don't know, give a fish a haircut. Okay, the metaphor breaks down at that point. But you're saying what I'm saying is that there are lots of changes that can happen that will not cause any of this to happen. And we have to distinguish between what are changes that could happen and what are the changes that have to happen in order to make this story historically plausible. Like make it possible for worms to turn into fish into lizards, etc. Now again, does all of that make sense before I go on?
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you mind if I ask you something real fast before we continue on, just because
Sure.
It's something that I just kind of thought of. So I'm going to switch sides for just a second here. So I realized something. What makes a different breed of dog different from most dogs than a wolf? And we were looking at, wouldn't wolves have more in common with dogs than the same as other breeds of dogs have with each other? If that makes sense. I can rephrase it if you need me to.
Yeah, I'm not quite understanding the question. Hit it again.
Okay, so you know how dogs have different breeds in it?
Yes.
What makes a wolf so much different than other dogs that they wouldn't just categorize in a different breed of dog?
Well, ultimately, categories are what we group things under. That, I mean, to say that a wolf isn't a dog is just, it depends on how you use the word dog. Like we generically use the word dog to mean our pets. That a wolf is a wild dog, but we don't call them a dog because they're wild. Like foxes are a type of dog, technically. They're in the, what is the family? Canidae, the canine family.
Yeah.
But we don't call them dogs because we use that term culturally to mean the animals we've domesticated and that live in our houses. But they're the same kind of thing. And that's where, all of our pet dogs came from, is some kind of wild, probably wolf kind that we domesticated and have, chosen certain properties or physical traits and behavioral traits, resulting in things like the Chihuahua and the Poodle, which nature would never create, I propose. But
I hope not.
So in short, it depends on how you want to use the language.
So it's
rule number one: define your terms.
Then.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you would say the difference between a wolf and dogs is domestication, then.
In terms of how we generally use that term, yeah.
Okay,
like genetically, they're kind of the same. I just saw a news article like a couple days ago where somebody had domesticated a fox, and domesticated fox start acting like dogs. That they even start barking and develop the behaviors and even sounds of domesticated dogs. So even just within a generation or two, they start to change their behavior when we start treating them a certain way. They grow up with a norm, having been born into human interaction. So, wolves are not, in the wild, wolves are not around humans. They don't have human interaction, and they have not been artificially bred to have certain behaviors, so that they have to have certain behaviors in the wild that are not necessary in your living room. But genetically, I don't know what important differences there would be between a wild dog and a domesticated dog, if any at all. I mean, once you get to something like poodle, we've whittled out so many functional genes that a poodle becomes just a genetic nightmare. Like as we bred dogs, we have chosen certain traits that have resulted from the loss of genetic variability. So the wolf population had a lot of genetic variability in it, which is why that wolf tree, the dog tree, can branch into so many branches. But as we choose and we choose and we choose, we are getting generations that have lost the genes that their parent and grandparent populations had, so that when you get to poodle, there's a lot of genetic information just missing that it doesn't have, that the wolf did have. So going from wolf to poodle is just a continual loss of information over and over and over, until now you have something that's still technically a dog, but has so many health problems because it can't do what the wolf population could do. Like certain breeds of dog they can't regulate their own heat anymore. They can't regulate their own temperature. So they couldn't survive outdoors because they no longer have the genetic information to create the structures and functions their body needs to regulate that temperature. They have to be indoor dogs. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Every now and then I think, I'm just making you drink from the fire hose. As a teacher, that's why I want to make sure that I pause long enough to breathe so that you can ask questions if you need to. Anyway, are we good so far on the frame of where I'm going?
Oh yeah, we're good.
All right, awesome.